Yeah. Yeah. I love the analogy of like looking at the US economy coming out of World War II and that kind of manufacturing, what led to this also this giant manufacturing boom. And and I believe exactly that's exactly why the technology that exists in the market, this kind of legacy technology, is developed in the way that it has developed, in the sense that is, I feel like services have been kind of left behind. They've been left behind in the kind of digital transformation journey that procurement has gone through in other areas, because
Right.
ultimately you had the ERPs coming out of the manufacturing industry, and then the kind of initial procurement platforms. And let's face it, procurement is a relatively young function compared to
Correct.
some other functions in business. The source to pay and procure to pay platforms that came out of the ERP was still focused on buying stuff. And as exactly as you say, stuff is tangible. Goods and materials are tangible. You can see them, you can weigh them, you can measure them. Um, and when you talk about services and the intangibility of services, that could even be within an IT project where you're developing a piece of software. And not only might it change along the way as you work out the unknown unknowns, but you might not even be able to know where the endpoint is at the beginning of it. Um,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
that's just so much more flexible.
But it's not just the technology, Johnny, it's also the law in the United States that
Right.
is very focused on goods. And I um, really struggle with my colleagues in law quite a bit because I get hired and the companies in the procurement supply chain space or supplier, the VP of sales, if I'm on the supply side, I come in and I say, I want to develop a flexible framework for this service. I want to create flexibility in the contract for the most common forms of risk that need to happen and understand who's responsible for what in the allocation of risk. A traditional lawyer from a law firm, though, comes in and overrides that conversation in some circumstances, not always, and says, no, you, Johnny, you're the outsourced provider. You're the expert on facilities management. You're taking on all of this responsibility. You're taking on the responsibility if this window leaks, even if I don't tell you about it, even if I don't pay you to come in and inspect it often enough. But if that window leaks, that's you're the facilities management company. So now you're responsible for that leak. So you've got to figure out how to manage this unknown risk if I can foist and allocate that risk onto you and your company. And so now we get into this ferocious tug of war where your legal team says, hey, you don't have money in the budget for us to do an inspection. We bid out in a full envelope service where we would look at everything roofs, wiring, plumbing, windows, etc., and give you a full report. You did not accept that as part of our bid. So we're not taking on the responsibility if there's a leak in a window. That's your problem. And then the company pushes back and says, well, if you want to work for us, you're going to take on these risks and you're going to, and some companies figure it out, right? Some companies say, we'll train our cleaners that only come in twice a week to once a month go through and look at all of the, windows or plumbing or whatever the case may be, and they'll take on that responsibility and they'll book it into the overall risk profile of being in business with that particular customer. But it's from the mindset of a refrigerator refrigerates, it cools food. I know what it's supposed to do. And so, as lawyers, we've taken on that same mindset with services, and we've tried to extend those concepts from the Uniform Commercial Code in case law to try to make things very definite. If you're a marketing company, you market. If you're a facilities management company, you manage my facilities. Making services, they're trying to make them as concrete with a definitive outcome and an allocation to the supplier as if I were buying a refrigerator where I could test it to see if it's actually 34 degrees Fahrenheit to keep my food cold but not freeze it. And in the services, the longer it takes to deliver that service, the more flexibility you need, because what I described about the SEO optimization, those things happen. Some companies such as Google may or Edge may, roll out a whole change that disrupts all the work I just did for 6 months. And how in a very inflexible, rigid contract, how do I address that? Do I blame you for a third party that we have no control over? Or do I find a way to maintain our relationship and re gear and readjust and still get a product out the door? Two very different kinds of legal mindsets as well.